Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here. For my first video, I thought it would be appropriate if I reviewed the first book ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, this story is essentially the oldest book, or the oldest poem or story in existence, and it dates back to ancient Sumeria. Really, this was written on a series of clay tablets almost 2,000 years ago, 2000 BC, so almost 4,000 years ago, making it the oldest story in existence. And to summarize the story briefly, it is a King Gilgamesh in the city of Uruk, which is modern-day Iraq, and to its very southeast, where it connects to the Persian Gulf, and the stories that revolve around him and his life. It is written the style of a poem with stanzas and so forth. And so if I were to take a sample, just a random page there, you can see the type of writing, the spacing itself. Originally, this was carved into a series of clay tablets, which today many of the phrases and spacing are eroded and missing, but they've been able to piece together and make a logical assumption as more than 80% of the text has actually been preserved miraculously. And you can see here, sometimes there's even illustrations and so forth in the book. And it's usually written in the style where if someone is saying something, it'll say their name and then, of course, what they're saying. So what is the Epic of Gilgamesh briefly about? So the story itself, it starts off with Gilgamesh, who was a king in ancient Sumeria, or Mesopotamia, or today Iraq. And he's a king, but he's also kind of a bully as well. He's very, he's very powerful, he's very masculine, but he's a little bit overbearing. And we get this from the narration of the book. It's saying that this is what Gilgamesh was like, and while he was a strong, powerful leader, he kind of, as I believe it says, lords it over his fellow citizens. So, he's kind of a controversial political figure. He's very effective, but also a bit, a bit of a burden on the rest of us. I'm sure we could think of some modern politicians that might fit that bill. And so essentially, what happens is, because the people are so fed up with Gilgamesh, but they also respect him as the king, they turn to the gods. And what the gods do, essentially, is they come down to, one of them, and I don't want to, I won't spoil too much, but they essentially come down to Earth, and they craft an equal or a friend for Gilgamesh called Enkidu. And Enkidu is essentially the same size, the same strength, and essentially kind of like his twin or his brother. And what occurs is that Gilgamesh finds him in the field, and they essentially fight, and they become good friends because of this. It's a very a classic guy kind of story. And so they decide, from there on, the book details the account of their adventures together throughout the ancient world, killing mythological monsters or whatnot. And again, some of these, chapters or adventures only take place over the place of a few pages, because the story, the epic, is so short. What is very interesting is the very last myth in the story. Gilgamesh essentially goes to the underworld, and he meets this mythological figure, this immortal that has been living there. And essentially what he does is, not only does he grant Gilgamesh the prize he's looking for, but also he recounts the story of the flood. So even in the most oldest text in humanity, we have evidence of a flood myth, which is seen again and again through the Bible and other stories. And I think it's very interesting that we even find it here in this book. There's not much to say without me spoiling anything. There's obviously a lot of people who have looked at this and looked at the Sumerian mythos and the lore and the religion, and have connected that to extraterrestrial phenomena or other things as well. I will note that it's very interesting how they talk about the gods in this book, how there is definitely a pantheon of Sumerian gods, and they each have their own distinct personalities and responsibilities and abilities similar to the Greek mythos, but obviously different enough. So would I recommend the Epic of Gilgamesh? I would recommend it, yes, absolutely, to almost any level of reader. I think even if you would recommend this to a child, they might be able to wrap their head around it. The wording might be a bit tricky depending on the edition you are reading, but really this is almost under 100 pages. It is incredibly, able to read in a day, and you've really focused an afternoon, and it really is, for small children, perhaps a nice notch in their belt, that so they can say, well, I've read, the oldest book in the world, and and it is very interesting, some of the themes and aspects, and exposure to the ancient Sumerian religion and mythos. This is a wonderful starting point, I would imagine. So with that being said, the Epic of Gilgamesh, what else, what more could I say? A simple short story filled with fascinating tropes and tales that will be read and rewritten and represented and taken from since the beginning of time throughout the centuries. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep reading.